Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming down to the dungeons and the basements to hear this talk. Title of my talk, From Challenges to Success, Launching nCino's First API Products. What I'm going to talk about today is, nCino is a fairly large company, and we've gone through a lot of transformation and change in our tech stack. And one of those pieces is sort of moving towards a developer-first approach and sort of tackling our API strategy. And a lot of the companies here, they have small startups, those kind of things. I want to sort of give a picture of what it's like operating in a larger company and sort of what that transformation went through. So a little bit about me real quick. I was a previous integration architect turned product manager. So I come from a technical background and deeply passionate about developer ecosystems. So a lot of why I've made the transition from architect to product was to start to sort of drive that priority in the business need around what developers needed. And then a little bit about nCino. We're a global and origination system. We go across commercial, consumer, small business, international as well, back office and digital presence with over 1,500 employees. So sort of how I want to structure this talk today is I sort of want to take you guys through the journey, sort of highlight some of the things I think went really well starting an API program, and some of the things I think went really poorly that I wish I could do better, to hopefully where you guys can sort of take some lessons with you. So these are sort of the stages I kind of carved the journey out to be. The first being whenever you're starting change in a company, setting that strategic vision and sort of what it takes to actually do that and how it's helpful. Looking at the API product lifecycle, looking end-to-end how an API product's delivered to market, launching our developer portal, launching the consumer banking APIs, which are our first real API product we're putting out to market. In full candidacy, the goal was to have them launch prior to this talk, but as things happen, we're pretty close to coming soon. And then further looking forward as far as after you've launched an API product, if you're in a company of 2,000 plus people, how do you actually scale the concept of API product management across your company? So we'll get into that a little bit. So the first piece that I think is sort of where I started, and I think this is something that went really well, is from the very beginning of starting nCino's API products, we sort of set this vision out. And it was to empower the nCino developers to build world-class experiences for their employees and customers through rapid integration, partner ecosystems, and M&A, and bespoke customer experience. And where this has been super helpful at nCino is functionally over our history, we've been a built by bankers for bankers company. So our primary persona that we focused on was the bank and the bank employee. So fundamentally, if you're going to launch API products and launch good API products, you have to create a shift in sort of your executive mindset and other product leaders that you are building products for the developer persona. And if that developer persona isn't built into your sort of product lifecycle, you're never going to build great APIs because you're totally focused on the banker, and the APIs will sort of take a back seat. So getting into sort of defining that developer persona, what we had to do, this was a piece that honestly I did a lot later in the journey. I wish I had done this up front, but there was a ton of time where I was going to teams and we need APIs, we have XYZ use case, XYZ customer wants it. But what was happening was it never fell into priority. It never actually fell on their roadmap. And what we figured out was even at the UX level and those sort of things, as we're having those conversations, we just weren't building that persona in. So defining the vision and the developer persona early really helps you get clear on your communication strategy as you sort of go around the company and introduce something new. Another concept at nCino, so we build software for banks, and there's a wide gambit of financial institutions around the country, right? We have the community space, small, regional, to enterprise. And I would go and talk about our API strategy to whoever would listen for a while. And what I realized is if I talk to our community banks teams, they'd be like, what's an API? Our banks don't care. They're just trying to figure out how to sign in at this point. So what we've started to realize is that I really had to focus on the enterprise use case, so sort of segmenting out your customers to figure out when you craft the developer persona, which one of your customers actually cares? And in the community space and the regional space, they really didn't. So focusing on talking to enterprise account executives and enterprise marketing is sort of where we're able to get that more product market fit and start to get people to start to care about the API program. Another really crucial part of sort of that setting the foundation is taking a look at your organization. So a lot of you are probably familiar with Conway's law of the structure of software will mirror the structure of the organization that built it. And when you think about like what an API is, right? It's the communication between your different engineering teams and how they function and work together. So if you're going to start an API program, you really need to look at how your organization is structured. So this was a previous version of how nCino was structured. We had multiple solution teams, stream-aligned, purpose towards building out for each customer. And then we had this platform team. And the responsibility of the platform team was to build all of our APIs. Now, the issue with that was that they were responsible for supporting all of the experience teams, so they had a ton of competing priorities as far as how to actually build APIs, which APIs they should build, and it ended up working really slow. And then they're also one step further from the customer. So if I'm going to build an API at the platform level, that API is never going to be suited for a customer to use it because I'm not talking to them, I'm not building their feedback in. And what this sort of turned into in the beginning, like manifesting the actual APIs, here's your Salesforce call out, Chris. For anyone who doesn't know, nCino's built on Salesforce, for better or worse. It does really great things for us, it does really bad things for us. Hopefully Salesforce doesn't hear this. But anyway, so what it turned out to be is that we created the nCino platform APIs that segmented across sort of 4 core features. We had relationship management, loan management, collateral management, and document management. Super general use cases, super platform specific that didn't really align to like customer needs. So what we've done is, so our API program, one, we made like a technical shift to moving off of the Salesforce ecosystem for our APIs because they really don't have true API management practices involved, and look towards the actual solution-based pieces. So we're looking at building API suites purposed to each of our solutions. So a consumer banking API, a small business banking API, and then also the use cases within them being end-to-end applications. So I want to originate a consumer unsecured term loan. What's an API that I can do end-to-end to originate a consumer unsecured term loan? And then again, on the integration side, which partners can be done with it? So we've eliminated that platform layer and got a lot leaner in how we operate, to where our developer experience team owns the dev portal and the platform and the tools that you would use to build an API, but our actual solution and experience teams are focused on building them closer to the customer and a much better chance of building APIs that they're actually going to use. So that's sort of part of the strategic vision. Again, like setting your vision, understanding your personas, and looking at your organization and how it's aligned is really crucial in the beginning. And those are all things that were super helpful for me, especially as we communicated broadly throughout. The next piece I think is crucial as an API product manager is understanding the API product lifecycle. I don't know why the arrows aren't showing, but so this is an image from Postman, and this I think is like the holy grail of an API product manager. So they segment it into 2 sort of pieces, the API producer and the API consumer, and sort of defining that process along the whole piece and thinking through the personas on each side. So what we did at nCino that was super helpful was we took all these stages and we looked at like, if we were the best API company we could be, what would we want in each of these stages? So like in the definement stage, aligning to nCino's SGTs, so those solutions, consumer, small business, et cetera, figuring out how we're going to report bugs internally on APIs, how we're going to actually gather our external developer feedback. We had no real process in place for this. From a design standpoint, we have no concept of like an API designer or an architect whose sole responsibility was to design APIs. We had no tooling for collaboration on API specs, no mock servers. On the develop and document piece, we had an API platform built on Salesforce that was sort of limiting us from a technology standpoint, and that pivot to moving to AWS for our API layer was crucial in that develop and document piece to actually create a platform that teams could execute on quickly. Testing and then deployment, again, that switch from Salesforce to AWS gave us a really strong ability to deliver faster and deploy faster. Observability from like a usage analytics and health monitoring of the APIs. Distribution, this was a key piece because we had no real way to distribute our APIs to customers. Chris knows we have nCino community, and we might drop like a somewhat put together doc in there that a developer can somewhat understand. But actually building a distribution mechanism to connect to our developers and then support, logging, versioning, community. So this was a really good diagram to bring to teams and be like, there's a ton of time to be like, I want to build APIs. And your execs are like, Joe Schmo over at this company told me they build APIs in 30 minutes and they deliver them over and over and over again. Like, why don't we do that? And it's like, we have no concept of this end-to-end process of how you can actually do that efficiently, do that effectively, and have reasonable output. Another important part is to understand that consumer life cycle. So like, how are customers gonna find your APIs, what they care about there, how are they gonna implement them in the capacities of what they would need, how are they gonna test them, and how are they gonna maintain them. These are two crucial points to sort of understanding as a product manager, your goal is to effectively execute on this life cycle. And if someone's asking like, oh, what's your roadmap gonna be if we give you an API team? It's like, I'm going to execute on this. I can give you a list of epics, I can give you a list of tickets, but like, that's not super useful. Here's the broader vision. We'll formulate the epics and tickets as the work actually comes and as it actually goes. So when we thought about the API lifecycle, from there, right, there's a lot of problems. Let's say there's 20 to 25 problems in there that you have to go solve. You cannot solve all of that once, and no one's gonna give you money to go solve all those at once if you're at a real business. So what we chose to focus on was the distribution and the discovery, right? So we wanted to make sure that we could connect to our developers as soon as possible. It wasn't about the APIs yet. It wasn't about how good our documents were. It wasn't about whatever. We just wanted to build that mechanism to start to engage with the community. So that sort of brings us to our next point, which was the launch of the nCino developer portal. So if you remember back to the organizational alignment slide, we had that nCino platform APIs in place already. We hadn't done the consumer banking, small business banking, all those things yet. And frankly, like, I would have loved to have, but we just went with the APIs we had today and got them released and got them out. So a really helpful thing of starting with Dev Portal, I think this was a really good win for us, was that at nCino, we're so used to building for bankers. And I was able to go talk to an account exec, talk to someone in marketing, talk to customers, talk to the C-suite, and show them like tangible output of what an API is. It's really nice if your CEO is an API first CEO and your company's been API first from the start, because this makes a ton of sense. But if that's not the case, you really need to start to paint the picture for them of what the value proposition is and what the tangible outcomes are. So starting a dev portal was super helpful for us just to start to socialize with all these different people what an API looks like, what it does, and how a developer would interact with it if you don't already know. Another piece we could start to do is we could start to measure our developer engagement. One piece that I wish we could have done was made our dev portal public, but we couldn't. Shout out to legal. So another good point of advice is like, when you're gonna do this, like getting those channels up with legal as soon as possible as you're going to do this, and just like, they'll always say no until you sort of explain what's happening. So I had tons of times where they would shut down dev portal, like, we can't do this. I'm like, no, don't worry, like, we're not exposing IP, this is a good thing, here's the value and all those things. What we were able to do is with our existing 20 APIs that, candidly, I don't think were great APIs, we were able to get 250 plus active users across 31 financial institutions, 5 SI partners, and one tech partner. The one tech partner is also legal's fault because they don't let tech partners into our dev portal yet. They will soon. But keep an eye on legal. Yeah, go for it. There's no way you'll get it. And then like API usage. So one thing I did really early on was get API usage implemented. Now, one thing that we're struggling with is just like consent from customers on analytics. So like, we've been pushing on that boundary and driving that piece. So we have all the analytics turned on, but we're on that consent roll of like being able to get that actual usage from customers. But what this picture is really doing is like, Dev Portal allows you to measure your developer engagement. And if you have the Dev Portal metrics and you have the API usage metrics, you can start to cross like, as I do marketing campaigns or as I make investments in improving my documentation, how is that actually affecting my output to my API adoption and the quality of them? Awesome. So on to the next piece. I wonder how fast I'm going. On to the next piece. We have the launch of the consumer banking APIs. So this was really our first concerted effort where we had strong priority to build an API product, and it was one of the first priorities of an actual engineering team to do it, versus sort of a side project where it was like, oh, we're building this feature, yeah, we might scrap together some APIs. But this was more like, oh, we're building a feature, and APIs are a core function of this feature. Oh, sweet animation. So again, coming back to how we set up our organization, a key piece when you're going to try and launch an API product is in order to get that priority from your executive and your management team, you have to be deeply aligned to a strategic business objective, or no one's going to understand why, you're not going to get the investment, and you're going to spin your wheels, you're going to waste your time, and you're not really going to get anything out the door. So what we did is we got really focused. We looked across those solutions and said, who has the biggest opportunity in the short term to have a true API product? And these US consumer banking APIs were sort of our best fit for that. One, given the relative simplicity of consumer banking relative to business banking and the different things that are required there. And then two, sort of where they were positioned. So we went through an acquisition about a year and a half ago for a company called SimpleNexus, who is a mortgage point of sale company. And what we did was, there's a big push through that M&A activity to integrate their technology into ours, right? So that was a key top objective of the company. And what we did was we sort of wedged the US consumer banking APIs into that objective, which did a great job in sort of giving us that priority and giving like true dedication from the C-suite to actually prioritize our APIs. So let's take a look at where we are and where we've been. So this is our dev portal. This is the existing nCino platform APIs as they stand today. So this is what we're coming from, right? When we didn't have strategic business objective, we didn't have executive alignment, we didn't have all the engineering practices on it. If we pop into, say, like collaterals, let me switch to APIs. If we pop into like collaterals, what you'll see is we used a SOA architecture underneath the hood for building our services. And you'll see like one of the first things is you have loader and saver here, which to any developer make no sense, but it's the actual implementation of a SOA architecture manifesting into our documentation. A classic case of like your APIs were a side project and not a fundamental like thinking about the external developer. Some other things you'll see in our old APIs is you have things like serialized JSON strings making it into your API contract, which are super difficult to work with as an engineer and super difficult to understand. So why I think that strategic business objective is so important and to have the correct priority on it is if you take a look at our consumer banking APIs, one, they're just like it's strictly on APIs, no extra documentation. It's super clear, like set up your environment, do your authentication, quick examples of how to make your first API call, real live code examples. We have clear, concise applications. I'm going to create an application. I have all easy to interact with contracts, and I can sort of pop through here. So this was a big difference in the quality of the documentation and the quality of the dev portal for what people can interact with. And I attribute that a ton to getting that strategic business priority. Now, a lot of the stuff will differ depending on who you work for, right? So if you work for a small API first company, like this is your bread and butter, you do this all day, and this might sound super trivial. But if you're an already established player in the market and you're coming into APIs, 10 years into your existence, or you're, I don't know if you have anyone from like a Jack Henry in the audience or anything, there's like a legacy core company like that. Or TransUnion. Yeah. And you know what it's like to take like, oh, we need to build strong REST APIs that people can interact with and how difficult it can be, right? So it's really important when you start to think of as your companies grow, really how to affect change. And this is sort of a good story representing that, I hope. So another piece in the launch is like you're going to launch an API product at a company who doesn't do API products. Like you need to make every single part of that sales cycle and that process aware of what you're doing. And when I first started doing this, I sort of casted a really wide net. I'm going to talk to everybody, anyone who will listen to me, whatever. And I ended up spending a bunch of time and having a really difficult time keeping up with all those different channels and all those different communication patterns. So what I've sort of broken this down to and how I think about it now is like as you're going through a launch process, segmenting your time and prioritizing the time the same way you would with the work. So like your first step is making sure you have customers for your product. And that's like focusing heavily on product marketing and sales and the collaboration there and not worrying about anything else. Once you know you have that identified either beta, EA customer who you're going to take it to market with, then you can start to talk to sales ops, legal, and accounting as far as like, can we actually take that sale with this new product, this new revenue scheme, and actually execute that sale? I put an asterisk on legal because they're not the fastest. Sorry if anybody's a lawyer. And then the third one being that delivering value. So then is when I focus on customer success, implementation, and support, right? So it's sort of, I could have spun my wheels forever on implementation. I used to work in implementation. Part of why I do what I do is because of the pains that were there, and I know everybody, and I could have spent all my time making it perfect for them, but then I would have had no idea of how I'm going to take it to market, how I'm going to give it to a customer, and those sort of pieces. So it's really about prioritizing your time and thinking about a launch in these sort of 3 stages was really useful for me. Another piece is if you plan to monetize your API products. So like there's a couple ways you can do it, like 3 basic ways. I'm going to charge you a fee. Give me $1 million a year, and I'll give you APIs. Super unsophisticated, super easy to do, probably leaving money on the table, easy for a customer to understand. Minimums with overages, we're going to give you 10,000 calls. You're going to pay us for the 10,000 calls no matter what. If you go over, we're going to charge you extra. And then that pure transactional base, where we're sort of landing is on that, it's sort of in that middle, because it gives you that predictable revenue while also giving the customer that flexibility. But no matter what you do in your monetization strategy, like it has to be centered on the business value that your APIs are delivering. So like we have, in the consumer banking APIs, we have 40 plus APIs in here. There are some simple APIs, like I'm going to create an application. We're probably not going to charge a customer to create an application. It's pretty simple. Simple CRUD. Now we have more sophisticated APIs like loan pricing. So this is I can just give you my application, give you my loan, and we'll price that loan entirely, give your customer back offers. A ton of competitive advantage we're bringing there, in that a bank hand-rolling their own underwriting API would be super difficult. So that's one where we can think of like there's true business value for the bank here, and we can think about how we're actually going to monetize that one directly. So if you take that loan pricing as an example, large customer impact because every customer needs to underwrite every single loan. It's a super big pain point for them. From a time to value standpoint, they can get up and going with an underwriting solution really fast. And then as a bank, for me to maintain my own underwriting solution is super expensive, super costly, got to maintain a large dev team, so we can reduce maintenance costs. So those are all clear business value things that we can convey to the market and therefore effectively monetize the APIs once they're launched. So the last step is building out the API product management practice, which this is sort of where I'm at today. So we're almost over the hump for launching the consumer banking APIs. And then the question is, if you think back to our solutions, we have 5 or 6 of them, right? So I'm not going to go sit on every solution team and drive the API knowledge for all of them all the time. I can't like cut myself up into 10 pieces. So what I have to do now, or what we as a company have to do now, is sort of take that knowledge and the learnings from the consumer banking APIs and plant them around the company to make sure we can continue on this success and continue growing. So that's sort of where I'm going to end it today, is on that sort of piece. If anyone has any concepts or advice on building this, I'm very welcome to it. But maybe next year I'll center it around that and how to do those sort of pieces. But yeah, that's it. So I appreciate you all taking the time to listen. And if anyone has any questions, feel free.
Thank you for sharing the journey. I see that you are still in it, and there's a lot of stuff that's happening, and it must have been a tough journey to like convince all the stakeholders. So kudos to you in fighting for the developer experience now.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether you're considering adding external APIs and kind of making it the and half of the APIs are ways to get into nCino, and half of the APIs are other things that people that use nCino might want to use.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is the full purpose of these APIs. These are entirely supposed to be purposed to give to a customer, give to a partner, give to an external audience. We have a ton of internal APIs, but the issue with some of those internal APIs, right, is like they're built from engineer to engineer, and they don't abstract enough of nCino away to make it approachable from a developer who just got told by their PM that I'm going to integrate into nCino. So we have a ton, and these are definitely focused towards the external audience there.
What I meant was APIs that are provided by others.
Oh.
Like, here's an API that lets me, it's already on there.
There's some on there. There's one on there for Alloy. So we've started that a little bit, and it's not true because like Alloy supports sort of a webhook callback interface. So this is our API where like if you use this webhook in Alloy, it'll directly integrate with you. But you're talking about like reselling, like if I did a partnership with like a Plaid and I'm reselling their APIs through this sort of thing.
Maybe if someone's like classifying transactions for you, you've got a lot of loan processes, you can like have someone else who's like conversational AI that collects documents from customers and puts them into nCino, which I assume you're not building, but someone else might build that.
Yep.
They just put it there, and for the consumers that are using nCino for their loan processing, it's like, let me check the nCino portal there, curating all the cool APIs that I could use.
Yeah, that would be awesome. If I had full control, I would do that. It would be pretty cool. Yeah, I can definitely see tons of opportunity there, especially like in the document piece. And the nice other concept here too is like we have one API for our like product catalog. It's hard to click from over here. Is like what we can do here is you can view like the entire consumer product catalog of a bank, their loans, their deposits, et cetera. Like this is super rich data for either ourselves to build like product recommendations and engines on, or execute as far as like from a partnership standpoint. Partners can take this data and build their own models there. So you can really start to like foster an ecosystem over top of it, which is definitely a large long-term value prop. But yeah.
So the last piece of the journey about API product management practice, how is it different from regular product management practice if you are putting API as a core feature of your product? Like why can't you just do that as part of your product management practice?
I think that's the piece of like proving out that external and partner APIs should be a core feature of every single solution. And then like once you've made that decision that it is, how do you actually go about executing on it? And if we have existing product managers who are super focused on UIs, banker UIs, and those kind of things, it's a different mindset shift of what it takes. Like an API product, I think, is fundamentally different, mostly in the concept of the persona. And I think if you can get those product managers to start to like really understand the developer persona, and also get like your UX team to understand the developer persona and how you design for them, my theory is that will start to work. So I don't think it's this massive insurmountable thing, but I do think there is a pivot in like evangelizing the developer persona across the company, which would then hopefully bring the product management practice into like solving for that.
So what approach do you recommend? Like who should lead that effort so that you don't have silo development on this, like one product manager is doing it, but another one is not doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth. I kind of to some degree like the siloed piece in a weird way, because what I'd like to see happen is that each solution prioritizes like the developer persona for themselves, and it's their power to do so. If small business doesn't see any revenue generating power for APIs, and like they shouldn't do that. Like we shouldn't force them to do that. Which that's the piece where I want to let it happen organically. And then as far as like to make sure that these siloed teams can operate and sort of create a consistent developer experience, that's when it sort of falls down to the platform team. So where I'm shifting after the launch of the consumer banking APIs is down to developer experience in our API platform. And that's what I'll engage with the different PMs across the company and be like, here's the standards, here's that product life cycle. We're aligned on that product life cycle and all the steps of it. And can they execute that sort of piece there too? So right now I'm experimenting with the concept of letting them develop them in silos from like a speed and an autonomous perspective, and hoping that platform can influence from a consistency standpoint. But
yeah, I mean, this is Aaron again, TransUnion. There's definitely a need to have standards that are followed across the board to make sure certain things get checked off, and are done as a way to be efficient across the board.
Yep.
Maybe certain groups in the way that they're thinking about their products and their audiences, they're fixated on one part, but they're not thinking about certain other things that are more administrative or broad or what have you.
Yep.
So there's something to that standardization.
Yep.
Question I have for you is, it sounds like for someone like TransUnion, it sounds like with your API ecosystem, it sounds like we will have the ability to, in today's world, we partner together today.
Yep.
Where nCino writes to our APIs.
Yep.
It sounds like what you're building here, what's in process, is really the other way around. We can just code right to
Precisely.
Your APIs and be integrated per se to whatever it is we want to be integrated to make sure that our data
ends up where it needs to be clear. So like that's like the second part of where we're looking to go. So one piece is like how to get data in, which from that perspective, like let's take a TransUnion use case. I'm going to call consumer credit. Like you guys need to know when to call consumer credit in order, if you're going to write back to nCino, when should I write it back? I need to know when you call it. So the next piece where I want to sort of go down is down like sort of the webhook and eventing side of things, to where we actually have like key events and webhooks within the nCino infrastructure. So like I'm onboarding a customer, we'll fire up a call credit event that TransUnion could easily subscribe to, and then you guys can do whatever you need to do and then push the data back into the APIs where you want to, so you can sort of create that platform for partners to build on top of. Because right now we have a bottleneck where we build almost to all of our partners. No one really builds on top of us. We really build on top of them, like the TransUnion use case. And what I want to do is unlock that developer curiosity at all of the partners and give you guys a stable platform to sort of innovate on and take control and autonomy of how you want to deliver on the nCino platform.
There's always all of the, you take however many providers that are in your ecosystem, and they're always rolling out different stuff.
Yep.
So there's always this evolution of different stuff that's always being created.
And it's really hard to like convey that to like certain executives of like, once you build the APIs, like it does unlock like a whole different world of the developer. Like everything that this conference is about, like it unlocks that level of curiosity. And that's the piece where like at first I was trying to just like say that, like if we build APIs, we're gonna create all this, like all these people are gonna create all this great product on top of them. But then what I realized is like that didn't really resonate with them as well. And that's where that like aligning to that consumer use case of like, okay, if I can at least get this first use case out, then I can start to like socialize and market to partners, and then that developer curiosity will go, and then I'll have actual proof points to explain to the C-suite, to executives, why it deserves more investment. But they're not there totally yet as far as seeing that and what it can do. A couple of them are, a couple of them aren't. But getting that raw data and those proof points is super important there, for sure.
So I'm not super technical, but
Yep.
I would like to know, you said monetization and that you all are falling in the middle of where you're pricing it at. It sounds like transactional, but what's the other middle? Are you gonna charge mins, or are you thinking about having just a flat platform fee? Like, because I know it's different throughout the fintech space and definitely API first companies.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of are taking a pretty open mind to it, and we'll probably take it on like a deal by deal basis too. Like I think ideally minimum with overages, just some like predictable revenue and easy to communicate with customers. But when it comes down to that, like that's going to be on a deal by deal basis, and we probably haven't made any real decisions relative to that.
I've seen with other partners in their marketplaces use that kind of middle model where you get a certain number of API transactions over, let's say, a year, and it's guaranteed, that's a minimum.
Yep.
And if you go over, it's X whatever.
Yep. And then you have the opportunity from like an upsell perspective of like, oh, you're going over, like we might even just give you these for free, and like, hey, next year, like let's renew and those kind of things. So it's an interesting concept to think of from like an engineering standpoint. So I don't know if like the engineers building the APIs think about that as much, but I think that's really powerful and helpful, especially as like you're coming in every day and spending 40 hours a week building APIs, like to actually think through those goals that I think sometimes product managers or certain development teams will shield the engineer from. I think like as a past engineer, those are the things that like helped me do my job exponentially better, to actually have empathy with those sorts of things.
I don't know if this is a good model, but I've been on this page for many years. I've assigned in my own head kind of roughly 2% to distribute. 2% of whatever I think the value of the product is to distribute. So to make sure to facilitate that product's on the shelf, to use a tangible example, it's worth at least 2% of investment in making sure it distributes.
Yep. Cool. Any other questions or thoughts?
How are you thinking about your sandbox, the developer experience or developer journey from sandbox to production? Do you have, how many environments do you have? What kind of data set did you see in the sandbox environment? How do you get the developers to move from their development journey and then to pre-prod and prod? Have you thought about that?
Yep. So that's like goes back to sort of the API life cycle, and that's sort of parts that we haven't totally tackled yet. But we do have concepts for like how you get an environment, how you get your keys, etc. This gets to like Chris's point earlier of like us being built on Salesforce. So our customers can have an infinite amount of environments, and they actually control their environments. So what we do is our APIs are all going to be production from our standpoint, but they have I guess this one doesn't have it. It's a good bug. They have an org ID section. So like whenever they put their org ID in the header, we're also working on some like more sophisticated authentication right now. Part of why they're not launched yet. Implementing like OAuth or so, but like the org ID will correspond to which environment they're using to. So our APIs will be deployed to prod, but they can choose which environment that they're hooked up to. And that's how those sort of control. And then whatever data is in their sandbox is what they would use through the APIs. It's an interesting problem with Salesforce, but yeah.
Do you have plans to give some early access for customers who want to test something that you have not released to production yet?
I would like to. Yeah. No clear plans. I mean, there's certain pieces like I said, like I'm working on getting like OAuth implemented in certain base things where I'm like, I'm not even ready for the EA thing like I'd like to be. But there's definitely some partners. Like we work heavily with SI partners, like the Deloittes and the Accentures for our delivery cycle. So like I talk to them once or twice a week and show them where we're at and what we're doing. I talk to certain financial institutions at least once a month or so to show them what we're doing, to make sure that their feedback's involved as much as possible. That's another key piece too, from a product management perspective, is just like once you've defined your developer persona, actually building a relationship with those developers. Because, I mean, at nCino, we sell to the C-suite from like who buys our product. We don't sell to those developers. So like our sales team might not be super engaged with them. So it's your concept as a product manager to go down, figure out who those people are, and meet with them. And don't be afraid to meet with the customer as much as possible, because your product will just get better much faster if you do.
So what's the technology partner and SI partner differentiation? How do you differentiate that?
SI partners are normally on like our delivery side. So like as they deliver nCino, it's like the Deloitte, the Accentures, those sorts of pieces. And the tech partners would be like another product company, like a Kodat or a TransUnion or anything, like another product company who's integrating to us. So a lot of times in project, a SI partner will like heavily customize nCino to a bank's needs. And they would use these APIs as sort of a layer for them to customize over top of. But yeah.
And relationship is with the SI or the end customer?
Which relationship?
In the SI scenario, who do you build to? Who do you have the relationship with?
A little bit of both. So like normally there'll be like a tech lead on the customer side of things, and then they'll have like maybe an army of SI partners implementing. So as many as possible, but normally whoever the tech lead is, and that will change on a customer basis, sort of where that relationship sits.
I know when I was having been a former teammate of yours, there was not really
Sorry, say that again.
The paper would be directly between nCino and the client, even if an FSI was involved. The licensing and MSA was direct. A couple questions. First, did I hear you suggest that your legal team knows the difference between OAuth and not OAuth?
Yes. We spend a lot of time together. We love each other.
Just a couple of points of information. So you talked a lot about kind of the distributed different teams and having to work with each one, starting with the consumer. As a PM, did you have a direct tech team that you were working with on this in addition to those, or was your role more like no direct engineer? This is my team I'm prioritizing, and more kind of matrixed in that way.
It was super fun. So like when we did the acquisition with SimpleNexus, we set up a team to sort of do the integration between the two companies. I was not on that team. I made myself a part of that team, and we built the API. So it was sort of like I literally just forced myself in there. We're gonna do this sort of a thing. And then so I've been working with them for a couple months now, hands-on like with the engineers. There's two PMs doing it. One more on the business banking side, and then me more on the technical side. And a lot of like getting back to like some of the standard stuff we were talking about earlier too. It's a lot of the reason why we didn't define a lot of these standards right up front was like we're kind of letting them manifest throughout the product, and then whatever comes out with the first consumer banking, those will sort of set the standards. But yeah, I had direct influence over the roadmap of the team building these. But then the next product I won't, so that'll be a different piece there to figure that out.
Got it. And I'm curious in the last stage of kind of establishing the practice of API product management. How big of a problem is that for you? Like, how many dozens of PMs are you trying to train on this?
It depends. So I'm sort of starting with each of our solution has like their principal, and I'm starting with them. And my goal, principal, and then the lead engineer. So what I haven't figured out yet is if it's totally going to be driven to the PM, or if there's like a staff engineer who can also lead the charge and lead the prioritization too. But right now, I'd say we have 8 solutions. I have 8 problems.
Okay.
Then the question is each solution sort of prioritizing their API roadmap differently. So like right now, I have 2 problems, but I will have 8 problems. You know what I mean?
8, but then those 8 have other people that they're
Yeah, they'll have teams and teams.
communicating on.
And that's the piece where like I'm hoping it starts with the principal, trickles down, or the lead engineer and trickles down. But again, I don't have enough real direct experience with that to see exactly how that manifests. I'm imagining it's not going to go at all like I planned. But yeah.
There is a talk by our Intuit colleagues about scaling the JEDI API program.
Yep.
It's actually at this time.
Yep, I saw they were in my competition.
You could, take a look at it.
Yeah.
We are trying to scale API product management across the company and across engineering as well.
Yep.
So that's a topic.
Yeah, I'd be interested for sure. Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. Appreciate you coming down to the basement.